Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Philline, a podcast where we talk about what it's like being in our 20s and the 20s. For today's episode, I wanted to talk about the importance of thinking before speaking. We always get super caught up in the moment and sometimes forget that, the other person that we're projecting our feelings to also has feelings. So, that being said, let's just get started. Well, hello there, you guys, and happy first week of August. I cannot believe it. It's literally the last month of summer, the last full, complete month, but I am just as excited for it to be fall because I just love fall, honestly. It's my second favorite season next to summer. It's sweater weather. It starts to get a little chilly, but not too cold that you literally hate being outside. But there's just always so much going on. And of course, September is my birthday month, and I know a lot of people listening are also fellow Virgo, so I'm really excited about it being September. But let's just take a minute to discuss what the hell is going on, because New York is having mandatory vaccines for things, and I cannot believe that's even happening because, of course, there's two sides to the coin, right? There's always, there's not really a right answer on how to handle COVID and vaccines and everything that's kind of going on right now, but New York basically decided that, people don't have a choice at this point. And I mean, if you really think about it, the Delta variant is super bad. It's really, really bad. Actually, fun fact, I've had to cancel my New Orleans trip because in Louisiana, it's so bad. The hospitals are backed up, the mask mandate is back. It's just a lot going on. And it's scary to think about on both ends because, this variant is spreading really fast and it's affecting children, unvaccinated people, and it's really just round 2 of coronavirus. I love it. It's literally so annoying. It's ruining everything, but, I can kind of see why New York would do that. However, it's once one state does it, a lot of others follow. So I feel like New Jersey has always been following New York and Pennsylvania too. So I'm expecting it soon, to that extent, to have it mandatory to just even go to a show or a concert or a restaurant, for example. And there are a lot of sides to this argument, of which I really don't want to get into right now because it's super exhausting to hear. It's literally just the common topic on the news, on Twitter. It's literally what everyone talks about. I understand it's such a serious thing, but at the same time, it's just can everyone shut up for 2 seconds? It's really hard to keep up with it. And honestly, all I can say is that this thing is dangerous. It's very real. And for people who still don't believe that, I literally have no words. It's a very dangerous and serious thing, not just in the US, even worse in other countries. And it needs to be taken with very serious consideration and very serious actions and how we can tackle it and fight it and really save lives, because there's a lot of people's lives that have, unfortunately, they couldn't make it through. And for us who are super blessed to still ride through this pandemic and still make it here, it's really up to us, end of the day, to take it with our hands and control this shit, man. We can't be reckless with it. And I feel like the entire summer, I think we all got a little reckless. I mean, I'll admit too, it started to feel good, thinking that this pandemic, quote unquote, was over. But in all reality, it hasn't even started. There's a bajillion variants out there, not just the Delta one. They're using all the Greek letters to basically count out all the different variants, but it's a very serious thing and it's really just started. So we kind of have to brace ourselves, but also just continue to be diligent, to continue to, protect ourselves from any risks. So that being said, that is why I felt like it was right for me to cancel my trip, which I'm super sad about, because that was one of the things I was really looking forward to. And I feel like my anxiety is kind of coming up again, and it's very difficult, but I know that even just planning something small, like in Boston, that's where I'm planning to go to instead. Even doing something small like that should help, but yeah, like I was saying, it's still all around us. It's here. It's getting worse in honestly all of the United States. So we just have to continue to push forward, continue to wash our hands as much as we used to. That's what confuses me too. Like, why did it take a pandemic for us to really be clean? You know what I mean? Like, we're supposed to be washing our hands this much. We're supposed to be sanitizing things. And it took a pandemic for us to really get cracking on being sanitized and being clean. Like, it's just very evident that we didn't really care about health related things, even the smallest things, like how touching a surface could get you the Rona. You know what I mean? Like, it's just little things like that that really, we just have to stay on top of it. And the more that we continue to do it, there's no doubt in my mind that if we continue being diligent and kind of just being aware of, maybe I'm standing too close to the person next to me, or maybe, I shouldn't share this drink with all these strangers at this party. Like, I feel like even at parties, it was super easy for germs to spread. Like, people were like, oh, let me taste your drink. Let me, try your high noon, or what flavor is this? Can I try it? Can I have a sip? Oh, wow, it tastes pretty good. Literally sharing everything. So even that, just being aware and being like, just knowing that it's still there. So that is my mini rant. I tried so hard to control myself because there's so much I would like to say, but at the same time, it's not going to do justice because I know there is, like I said, two sides to every coin. And it's what a more perfect, tie into today's topic of thinking before we speak and thinking before we act. And I think in our 20s, it is still a little hard to control our emotions, and it's very easy to let our emotions get the best of us. And I am one to admit that I definitely do not have control of my emotions, control of what I'm thinking, and I don't really tackle it at the root cause of whatever's bothering me. And thinking before you speak, it's not just in a social environment. It is important to always just be aware and be considerate of what you're saying, because long story short, everyone around you is going through their own shit, their own problems, their own things that they're dealing with that maybe you don't even know about, maybe no one knows about. So it's very easy to be prepared to let out your feelings, your frustrations. And it's not as easy to relax, to listen to what the other person has to say, to really absorb and think about the other person. You've seen in so many shows and so many different situations, and so many times people tell you, imagine how they would feel, or put yourselves in their shoes. And a very easy thing to say, but very hard thing to do sometimes, because oftentimes we let our frustration and anger kind of cloud our judgment towards the other person or the situation, whatever's going on. So I guess I'll start with an example that I feel like personally I kind of keep to myself, because I don't think anyone likes to think about the fact that we think before we act or speak, but my parents, my relationship with them is something that I feel like is super important in terms of just today's episode. I, growing up, really thought that they were out to get me, and every time they stopped me from doing something, yes, maybe sometimes it was a little bit extreme. It wasn't, the right way to handle it. But I always thought that no matter what, they were out to get me. I was never going to be happy with this kind of lifestyle. And I don't know why. I didn't know why. And it really frustrated me. So I would take it out on them all the time. I would get super frustrated with my parents and say things that to this day I regret, because no, I didn't curse at my parents. I really didn't curse at all. That's a fun fact. I didn't curse until probably high school. And then all of a sudden I was saying curses left and right. But that's a whole nother story. Anyways, I really didn't put into perspective why they were so strict on me. If you really think about it, and parents are kind of the first example I'm going to set for you guys. You don't know what they've been through. And it's crazy because how irking is the statement that they tell you, I've been through this before. I've already been through this. Don't play this with me. Like, I've already been there, done that. And as annoying as it is to hear, it is true. And I didn't really realize that until I was really old enough to kind of see and be aware that the younger generation repeats history quite often. And it's a common, theme that happens over the generations. We constantly are repeating things that have happened in the past, and it's not different in terms of personal families. It's even on a global level that things happen over and over again. So that's why I feel like, especially with parents, they always are like, oh, you'll understand one day. And I feel like we're kind of getting into our 20s and really thinking about adult things, and things are starting to make sense, why they were super strict about one thing or just really opinionated in one direction. And it all starts to make sense. And I think it is because we're finally maturing in our brains. It's not just about what we want selfishly. It's about, being considerate of other people around us and understanding that they too are coming from a good place for the most part. So I think that really ties into today's episode of thinking before we speak and before we act, because, speaking is just a portion of someone's reaction. It could be something that we do too. Oftentimes when we're really frustrated or mad, you just want to do the most reckless thing ever. And I'm not different from that. Sometimes when I'm really frustrated, I just want to do something else a little crazy, maybe even drive somewhere or do something a little reckless, which actually reminds me, I was binge watching the Twilight series on Netflix and I completely forgot how cringe it was. But a perfect example that comes to mind when I'm talking about recklessness is that in New Moon, Edward left. He disappeared. He was like, I don't want to be with you anymore. And she's like, well, fine. I'm going to do reckless things because that's the only way that you show up, because it's this consciousness that tells me not to be reckless. And every time she does something reckless, he comes out in ghost form and he's like, Bella, no. But that's kind of what I'm talking about. Oftentimes we're so hung up on our emotions and we forget that what we could be doing could potentially be not only hurting someone else's feelings, but potentially ruining a relationship with yourself, your parents, or whoever you're interacting with. So again, I think it's just a really good thing to practice in our 20s, especially because, we're going to be raising kids of our own and people who look up to us. They don't know any values besides the one that we will expose to them and will raise them in. So why not start now, just for the future of your kids and also just for your personal growth, to really, notice what's going on around you and kind of apply that to yourself before you explode and react in a way that you probably wouldn't have had you not been completely pissed off. So, and you guys know this, obviously. This is a super obvious thing, but words are so freaking powerful. I don't think people really understand how heavy an influence is of just one statement. One example that I can tell you is on Instagram. I think, just scrolling randomly, and I saw a post and it said 10 different reasons why I wouldn't compliment someone on losing their weight. And I was like, wait a minute. I mean, someone's losing weight. That's fantastic. That's what I was thinking. And then I read about it a little more. And it had some very good points. People sometimes take losing weight as the standard. I don't know how to explain it directly without saying, the standard of body shape in the US is disgustingly thin and fake. And honestly, a lot of times to get to that body shape, that hourglass, that slim, thick, shape, it requires some surgery, and it's not really a natural body shape, I would say. And those of you who are blessed with a natural hourglass body shape, I'm so not jealous, but lucky you know what I mean? It's less work for you guys, but sometimes we like to think that we can get to that body shape, but the truth of the matter is sometimes your body is just not meant to be in that shape without, interference through surgery or other things. So kind of going back to this post, that post had a good point. Some people say weight loss in a way like this. Wow, you've lost so much weight. You look so much better than you did before. And that might sound like a compliment, at first, but if you really think about it, you look better than you did before. So when someone's telling me that, like, let's say, for example, I looked better than I did before, I would feel away. Not only was I insecure about my body shape beforehand, but people also saw that, It's sometimes not a good thing to say it in that way, at least, That's why I'm also careful when it comes to people who are losing weight, because sometimes they don't intend to lose that much weight, and already talking about it makes people uncomfortable. And the thing with words and why they are so powerful is that once you say them, you almost never forget them. And I think that definitely applies a lot in just my past, because there are certain things that I have said before in middle school. Mind you, I was a little adolescent. I don't know what the fuck I was saying half the time, but people still remember what I used to say in middle school. And that really bothers me because I was a totally different person in middle school. I was mean. I was a bully, and people don't really realize that talking about it is like triggering me. There's also another thing that we don't really realize, that sometimes what we say triggers people emotionally, physically, mentally. There are certain things that we don't realize about people's history because obviously we don't live their life. We don't know what really triggers them. So even telling them that they lost weight could be a trigger for them. It could be something that sets them off emotionally in a negative way. So that's one thing I at least try to think about when I'm saying things. I mean, like I said, I still don't have 100% control over my emotions, my annoyances if I'm frustrated. But I try to be a little more proactive in that, you know what I mean? Because end of the day, like I said, everyone has their own feelings, their own shit that they're going through, and you really never know the power of one sentence that isn't forgotten ever. And I really hate that people still talk to me about middle school, because I didn't like who I was in middle school or high school. So I get kind of embarrassed. And even sometimes when people are telling me about different interactions they had with me in middle school, I literally am like, okay, I don't want to talk about this. Moving on, next topic. But the past is the past. And honestly, I'm trying to come to acceptance about that. That, like, when people talk about your past, sometimes it's not a bad thing. You get to see who you were before and be more appreciative of who you've grown up to be today. And I try to look at that too in many ways, because middle school and high school was really, really hard for me. But kind of working my way up since middle school, there are obviously still so many interactions after high school that, looking back, I could have handled differently if I really thought about the situation, gave myself time to breathe, and then reacted. I feel like because we don't give ourselves the chance to really absorb what just happened, absorb our feelings, we don't really get a chance to react properly. So, in college, I feel like I still kind of carried that with me, and it wasn't until I started noticing it about other people that I was like, damn, I need to fix myself. Because, not to really get into specifics, but there's just this one friendship that I used to have that, when they would get drunk and kind of a little bit out of control, speaking wise, they would constantly rag on me and be like, dude, you're a horrible friend. I don't know why we're even friends, this and that. And it would stick to me. I'm never going to forget when someone tells me that, right? Because obviously things like that are going to bother you. But I was just such a nice person that I kept forgiving them. And literally, it kept happening over and over again. And it got to the point where I was like, why am I allowing myself to keep up with this? And it just goes to show that really, sometimes people will never forget what you say. And especially, I feel like that's why I've been kind of toning down on drinking too, because, when you're little drunky pants, you have less of a filter and sometimes you regret things you say. And I'm definitely one of those. I've said some embarrassing things before in my life, but that's why sometimes feel like I can't drink as much as I used to. And that also is just like not comfortable for me, just knowing that I don't have a filter and I don't really remember half of the shit I say. I don't like that feeling at all. It makes me uncomfortable. But that's why I feel like nowadays I've been focusing on just being more non-reliant on alcohol and just wanting to drink to not be anxious to talk to people, because that doesn't allow the opportunity to really understand your environment, the people around you, and really understand, what they're feeling, their vibe, and really understand how you're going to interact with them. And being more self-aware is really, I've said this so many episodes, you guys, like being self-aware is really where it all starts. You don't know how to react to something if you don't know how you feel about the moment. There is no telling how the right way to react is unless you yourself can see and understand how you're feeling, how the other person's feeling, and how to best handle the situation. And the thing is, when I say something or when other people tell you to really be like, okay, put yourselves in their shoes, or why don't you assess the situation for a minute? It doesn't mean it's going to take like days or months or years to understand a situation. Sometimes it could be really easy as a simple 10-minute break from a really heated conversation. And I'm not just talking about conversations with our parents at this point. I'm talking about conversations with friends, significant others, siblings, any conversation that is getting a little bit heated, and that you're getting kind of annoyed and irritated, and that like the next thing that you say may not be something that you 100% really mean, that is a trigger. You need to identify that yourself and kind of determine, what types of conversations are really triggering for me, and really listen to your body. There are different behaviors that everyone does when they're starting to get annoyed. Me, I get sweaty hands. And I get fidgety. And that's when I know that I'm getting a little irritated about something. And that's also when I know that I need to take a deep breath and step away from the conversation for like 5 or 10 minutes. And it's amazing how 5 or 10 minutes can completely give you a different perspective on a situation, because you're not in the heat of the moment and you're not feeling as reactive as you were 5 or 10 minutes ago. And a lot of times people think they don't have control because obviously we're reacting to something that someone else has said or a situation that has happened. But we actually have a lot more control than we think. I keep thinking that sometimes my reactions are 100% justified, but my reactions sometimes don't equal the reaction that I should be portraying to the person in front of me, or to the reaction, or to the situation that's presented to me, right? It is really up to us to kind of be responsible for ourselves and really understand what's going on and control what comes out of our mouth, right? And it's hard because, don't get me wrong, once your emotions start to get a little stirred up, it's a little hard to stop. It's like this, the rolling snowball down the hill. You think about a texting conversation. I'm going to start with that because I feel like our texting conversations are getting a little more common these days in terms of like communicating with other people. But once that thumb starts going off in the text messages, you just can't find yourself to stop. And that's kind of a small portion of how we can kind of control ourselves. Realize that you're getting a little agitated. You're wanting to say so much, but this is just not the right way to say it. And that's a moment where you're like, hold up, let me stop the phone real quick. Give myself 5 minutes. That other person on the other side of the phone will most definitely still be there by the time you're done really assessing the situation. And you can come back with a response that is not just only more mature, but more considerate of the other person. And it really just starts, once you give yourself that time to really think about it, it becomes second nature for yourself to really think about things before you say or do them. And behind a phone, it's so much easier to say things that you don't mean. And that's one downside to electronically communicating with people, right? It's so easy to curse someone off behind a screen than really in person, because low-key, people are chickens in real life. And I'm not saying that in a joking way that's offensive. We just know that it's wrong sometimes to say certain things to people to their face, but why is it so easy for us to get on the phone and type it out and send it off and not care? Because we're not thinking about the other person. Again, it ties into that. When we're not face to face with somebody, we don't see their reactions. We don't get uncomfortable because you don't see them when you say something and you can tell that what you're saying is hurting them. That's why we rely so much on breaking the bad news via text, via messenger, via anything on our phone that we don't have to say in person. And like I said, I feel like our generation is slowly losing that, connection in person because people would rather talk through text. But me personally, I'm more of a FaceTime and call person. I can't answer my texts anyways. I'm really bad at responding to people, but I've just been making it an active decision to want to talk to people more in person or face to face. And this doesn't apply all the time to just personal life or your relationship. It also applies to the work environment. There are so many people who are just easier to manipulate and, take control of through Teams, through email, to constantly follow up with people and be aggressive about it. But when you're talking in person, I feel like, me personally, I chicken out. I'm like, damn, I can't ask this person. They look busy right now. But that's a point because you're aware now of your surroundings, the person's surroundings, and you can tell, you get that energy from them that they're busy and they can't answer your question right now. And that already is an indicator of like, oh, maybe I should ask them, like a later time or something. But how would you know that if you're working from home or not actually seeing them at work? And again, that's why even at work, I try my best. I'm still not good at it yet because I just feel like our generation is so reliant on technology to get the message across. I'm trying so hard to, especially with older generation employees and just older employees who don't really use their email or Teams that much, to go and ask them questions in person. And I hate it because I hate talking to people and communicating. I get uncomfortable sometimes, especially because I'm still kind of new. This office is huge and you don't even realize it because not the entire office is even there yet. But every time I go and talk to somebody, I feel like I'm always seeing someone new and I'm like, oh, hey, I have to introduce myself for the 50th time and I'm already anxious about that. But it's all a matter of practice. That anxiety and that fear of talking to people face to face goes away over time. The more that you do it, the more that you're comfortable just letting it out on the table. And again, when it comes to work, and I guess this also can apply to personal issues and relationships. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but email conversations take 5 million more years to get their point across. Am I right? I mean, really think about it. How long has an email chain been going on in your inbox? Back and forth, literally the same sentences back and forth, and it goes on and on and on. When really, if y'all just had a quick 30-minute call or a meeting, it'd be done in a snap, literally just like that. And that applies to personal relationships too. I feel like there's always so much back and forth through text that you really could summarize in 5 words. And it's because we just don't think about how the other person could be reacting. And, when you see someone else's reaction, it is a reaction to the reaction for you to realize, oh, maybe what I'm saying is actually not right. Maybe what I'm saying is hurting this person's feelings. Like, what can I change about that? But if you're behind a screen, it's not easy at all to see how this other person's reacting. You're just going to keep going and going and going and going. And again, that's kind of what I used to do when I was younger, even just the past months. It's super easy for me to just text my problems, but it's missing that emotional connect. And I feel like the emotional connect is so important, but that's why even through text, I try my best to think like, what is this person going through? How are they feeling? Like, why are they reacting this way towards me? And it gives me a totally different perspective. And I guess like one major thing that I try to think about when I'm reacting a certain way or thinking about what to say or do in reaction to someone else is there's something on Google that I looked up, and it's this 5 sentence. It's literally the word think, and each letter is kind of its own question. The T is what you're saying true? Like, although that's a very basic question, I feel like sometimes when we get reactive, get negative, get annoyed, we say things that may not be 100% true because we're pissed off, and we start ranting like, I don't know why so-and-so reacted about this, They don't even know half of it. Like, they don't even have the smarts to understand how I feel. Of course they have the smarts. That's just one example, but, you don't mean that. It's not true when you say that. Second one is the H. Is it helpful? And I think this one is the strongest question out of the 5 of them, because is what you're saying helpful? And it's such a very general question, but really think about it. Like, what are you trying to accomplish by saying what you're about to say or do? Is it really worth all that energy to go and say all that, go and do all that? I think about that often, especially when friendships are going through the gutter and relationships are breaking up so bad. Adding that extra painful statement is not helpful. And getting in the heat of the moment and still reacting in the heat of the moment, it's not helpful. And I think a lot of times people forget about that. They forget that they're still in the heat of the moment and they don't allow themselves to have that break. Because some people, okay, maybe me too, I'm very fidgety. I want things to be done and over with as soon as they happen. But some conversations won't work if they're still in the heat of the moment and both of you are pissed off or both of you are mad at each other over something. If you don't give each other that time to really absorb the situation and kind of figure out what do both parties want from the end of this situation or conversation, there's no way you both can move forward and kind of figure out what can be improved or what can be done better to maybe prevent something from happening again, right? And also that just applies to work too. There's a lot of situations where this question is very important. Is what you're about to say or do helpful to the situation? If you're going to tattletale that your coworker is not completing all the shit that they're supposed to do without realizing that their manager, who is also your manager, gave them a bajillion other things to do and prioritize, you're going to come off as an asshole. Like, you're literally going to be coming off as someone who's just whining, you know what I mean? So you have to kind of be careful, think it through, and really understand the situation. And it starts, again, with understanding what's going on around you, what's going on with the other person, why are they reacting this way? The I in think is it important? And I love this question. I know that it's making me laugh a little, but it's what I ask quite often. If I get annoyed about something, if I'm about to say something that I may or may not regret in the next 5 minutes, I always give myself the 5 seconds, is it really important for me to say this? Let's say you're fighting with your sibling and this is just a very trivial example. You guys are already fighting and you're about to say, well, you know what? I'm never going to let you have my clothes again. Or this is why I never let you borrow my stuff because you don't let me do anything, blah, blah, blah. All the extra comments is not important to the situation. And I could think of very many other examples between me and just my sister alone of things that I shouldn't have said because it wasn't important. You know what I mean? And the N is it necessary? And that kind of ties in with the is it important, because necessary, important kind of ties hand in hand. But sometimes, people like to get super reactive and negative when they are presented with a situation or event that they're not happy with. And therefore, which I think is a little different sometimes from gaslighting, because gaslighting has deeper intentions and deeper purposes. Meanwhile, when you're reactive and you just say things out of nowhere without thinking because you're in the heat of the moment and you're mad, that's, I feel like, a little bit of a different thing. But is it necessary? Do you really have to bring up how they're eating if you're fighting over computer usage, for example? If you guys are fighting over having to do more outdoor things, do you have to bring up the fact that they're not doing the chores in the house, for example? It's very easy to add all the other stuff that's bothering you, and kind of, it makes you think that you have a stronger argument, right? But really you don't. And actually, I feel like sometimes when I start bringing in other things that bother me, it literally makes no sense whatsoever. I start to forget the central focus. And this happens a lot in our 20s, and not just in our 20s, but as we're growing up and interacting with people. You argue so much to the point that you forget what you're even arguing about. And you've seen this in TV shows and everything. If you don't allow yourself to absorb what's going on and what the current situation is, you could lose it because you're so hung up on all the other things. Like, oh, you don't have enough time for me? Well, you also don't do the dishes. You don't clean. You don't take care of this. You don't do this and that. And it starts becoming this whole long list of issues that you have that maybe you really didn't have at first, but because you're already annoyed, you might as well just throw it in. Maybe the other person didn't do their laundry like 1 week out of the entire year, God forbid. And all of a sudden, because you're angry, you want to include that into your argument to bring it up more, you know what I mean? So is it really necessary? No. There are things like that if you just took a minute to think about it, you would know it's not necessary for this particular moment of time. If you're going to argue later about laundry, then bring it up then. But the last question, and I think this one is very much connected to our emotions and how people are feeling around us, is what you're about to say or do kind? I'm going to let that one sink in for a little. Is what you are about to say or do kind? And a lot of times it's not, especially because we are speaking or doing selfishly, which, like I said, it's okay to be selfish sometimes. It's okay to be in the moment and be angry about something. Totally okay. But the way that that's portrayed to somebody else who also may be hurting in their own way from the situation, it may not be as kind to them the way that, you're seeing something versus the way that they're hearing on their end. And oftentimes we don't realize that because we're so hung up on our selfish frustrations. Like, oh, I'm so mad. Why can't you understand me? And the truth of the matter is they are definitely thinking the same exact thing. A lot of times we don't really realize that in the moment we're talking to a whole ass other person with all emotions and all different things going on too. And as confused as you might be about the situation, they're probably just as confused and frustrated. If you think about it, even just for a little, you can change something that will forever have an impact on somebody's emotions and physical health and mental health, and they'll never forget what you said. You can turn it into something negative and figure out some way to make it positive, not just for them, but for you as well. Something that's more open to the opportunity of growth, of change, of what can we do now moving forward to not have this happen again, or to just have better situations different from what's going on right now. And that is something that we can control too. I said earlier, we can control our emotions and how we react to things. This is very much true. You can control the situation and kind of make it so that it's something more positive rather than something that's about to fall apart into a million pieces and never come back together. And when I'm saying this, it doesn't mean to lie. It doesn't mean to not still be transparent about your feelings, your reaction, how you feel about something. Transparency, I'm 100% for, I embrace that shit. Like, you gotta be straight up, but sometimes you can say it in better ways than what you're about to say or do right now. And you'll be surprised how quickly something can get fixed by just changing the way that you react and you handle the situation. It could literally make or break a relationship. I've seen it, I've experienced it, and it's helped me grow so much because not only are you thinking about, yes, I'm hurt, but I know this person is hurt too. So what can we do together to make it work? What can we do together to just make it better? And Viktor Frankl, I can't pronounce it. I'm pretty sure I'm saying it right. He's an Austrian neurologist, and he's had so many books. There's something I want to read. It's called Man's Search for Meaning. I'm definitely going to add that to my reading list and come back to you guys when I finish. But something that he has said is, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And that resonated so much. If you think about it, every reaction can be controlled. It doesn't have to be right away that you react, but we choose to go that way because it's the easier way. You don't have to think when you react. And that's more work for our brain, more work for our neurons and all of our reactions in our body and our hormones. It's better to just react right at that second. But if we just take a step back and give ourselves even a minute or two to understand, like, what this girl just say to me? What she just say to me? Like, like really understanding where they're coming from. And if you don't understand where they're coming from, I would say a good way to handle that is basically be like, where is this coming from? Why are you saying this? What is making you feel this way? And that already opens a door for a whole different conversation where you're allowing the other person to express their feelings maybe in other ways that they couldn't, besides being reactive in a negative manner. And you would never know that unless you took a step back and really understood that this just happened. Like, how do I feel about this? My heart's racing a little. I'm getting a little anxious, a little bit annoyed, sweaty. I feel like I'm about to punch something, but let me think about it. This other person has had a lot going on in their life. Maybe this small thing is just the cherry to their bad day cake. Like, I definitely changed how I look at people because I just know that behind all the smiles that they give you, all the kindness that people around you give you, there's a whole story behind that. There's somebody who has experienced maybe trauma, maybe a horrible childhood, maybe even just in the past 6 months, something traumatic or something that emotionally affected them permanently. And I will never forget that because I've been around so many people that I know from one stranger, they'll think they're the happiest person on earth. And even relationships, I've seen on social media, the happiest people together. And truth of the matter is, behind it all, there's a lot of shit going on, and you're not the only one, and they're not the only one. So I feel like that's just something to constantly remember when we are about to say something, about to do something, and just think about our power as person and how our actions and words can really affect something else, which in effect will affect something else. Like this whole butterfly effect, snowball effect, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes the little things do matter. And if we just acknowledge that and realize that even what we're about to say to the person in front of us who has really gotten on our nerves in the past 10 minutes, it could change a lot of things. And honestly, sometimes the way that you react could be a perfect example to them of how they should react. And therefore, your awesome way of handling a situation rubs off on them. And they react the same way in other situations that happen to them with other people. And it causes just a much more self-aware environment. A group of people who are much more self-aware of themselves and the people around them. You really don't know, you really don't know how far your reaction will go. And an example of a bad statement or something mean that you say to somebody, they could tell someone else who could tell someone else who tells like 20 other people. And in that group of people, someone knows you. And now they have this predetermined opinion of you because of that one interaction. You really will never know. And people who are in your lives now, who maybe disappear for like 5 or 6 years, could come up again and they will literally remember the impact that you've had on them, whether it was big or small. You always have an impact on somebody. And I think that's so important and so strong and something so big to really like realize that we have more power to influence than we think. Whether it's large or small, it has an effect on somebody. And I think that once we realize and understand this, we can really handle situations at the best that we can. Right now, of course, you're handling it the best that you can, but after hearing this episode, you know so much more. You learn so much more. You're so much more aware that there's a completely other person on the other side of this conversation or situation or other sides of the coin. And when you really listen to that, it will really matter. Everything that you say and react will really matter. And kind of a final thing that I feel like I've learned in terms of acting and not really thinking before I speak and act is really listen. I feel like we have and listen, I'm Filipino and I like to talk. I have a lot going on in my brain and I can definitely, when I'm irritated, interrupt you mid-sentence and kind of continue to be irritated. But I'm working on that, That's another kind of portion on it, listen before you speak. And on my website for this post, there actually is a Bible quote that I'm obsessed with, and it's James 1:19. And it says, "Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." Now, why is it I feel like it's so hard to be quick to listen and slow to speak, and especially slow to become angry, because we don't have all the information right away at that first second. We don't absorb everything right away at that first second. We're not slow to speak. We're not slow to become angry. We're not quick to listen. We're slow to listen. We're quick to react. And although that might be something that we're used to because that's just how we've reacted to everything in the past, doesn't mean you can keep it forever. It can change if you just actively work on it. And these little things will really have a positive outcome, not just in yourself, but in other relationships too, because you'll start to feel a lot better thinking about things before you do them, because there obviously will be less that you regret. You'll hurt people less. You'll think about the situation more and react in ways that aren't as explosive or violent or aggressive. And you'll be super proud of yourself. Like, you'll be like, damn, I used to scream at the second I heard this topic, but now here I am, like understanding and really knowing that sometimes people are different from you. That's another thing. Whenever, you get heated about something, you gotta think. Sometimes people look at things differently from you, and that's what makes us so awesome as a human race, that we just think so many things. But it's all these different thoughts that really make new ideas, new inventions. And of course, it starts with a couple arguments here and there, but that's how people come up with great ideas. But as corny as that is, I'm going to go back to what I was saying, that we should be quick to listen, really hear out the other person, and really understand where they're coming from, because you don't necessarily have to agree, but you can also understand. The understanding is so big, and this is going to be super applicable in people that we're going to raise, from childbirth, and people that are literally going to rely on us for simple life skills such as thinking before we speak. And if we instill that in ourselves, we can definitely set that as a great example to everyone around us. So yeah, that is my TED Talk. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. I loved talking about just how we can think before we speak and act, and really realize that everyone is their own person going through their own things, and we really are just part of this huge puzzle of life that we're all going through, especially in our 20s. We got a lot going on. But if you guys have any questions, concerns, DMs, message me on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and obviously on my website. This post is going to be available tonight, and you guys can comment whatever you want. TikTok and Instagram are at Philline Podcast, and my Twitter is at Philline. And my website is PhillinePhillinePodcast.com, so feel free to like my posts. There's a little bit more information that I put on there. So yeah, that's it. Until next time, bye!